Now a slight continuation for the previous chapter, configuring for environment-specific settings. This is just where we go through the system settings again, what we have available with them, what we can configure, and basically what the levels are that we can configure on. It says system settings provides a better way of managing configuration in Liferay. Does anybody know a better way than what? What would we mean with this? Then restart. Yeah, then portal properties, correct. We don't need restart. I would say yes, that's a win. That's a better way of configuring. Plus you can export them and import them also at runtime. You can just distribute them and say, this is the configuration we need for LDAP, without saying like, okay, this is my portal X properties file, and this is the portion in there that I need for LDAP. So change this, but by no means change that and that. So I would say it's a lot easier than the previous versions where it was harder to distribute specific settings. You could still do so, but as you said, at the price of restarting. So a lot better than needing to restart. The system settings that we have here, as we say, or as it says here, they allow for two scopes of configuration, the system-wide or the instance-wide. Now we haven't covered instances yet, and they're actually not covered too deep in this material, but sooner or later, I should drop a few sentences about instances. So what is an instance as opposed to the system-wide? In Liferay, you can have multiple instances, which are, I would say, virtually separated, completely new portals. They do share the application server and the plugins that are deployed to the OSGI runtime. But everything else is new. There is a new user database, there is a new site configuration or a site collection in each individual instance. And you'll find them in control panel in the instance, how are they called? Instance settings, virtual instances. That's where you find them. Every instance needs its own site name because it is determined on an HTTP level which instance you want to access. Every instance must have a new site name or URL, and based on the site name we will figure, or Liferay will figure out where to go to. Now, fun fact, the very first instance, the default instance, is special because it has all of this global configuration part that you see here in the configuration section and the apps for Marketplace. You can install new apps in the standard instance, but not in any of the secondary instances. This is actually one of the main uses that I've seen for instances. Sometimes we have somebody hosting a Liferay installation for many different customers, and they separate all of these customers out in one instance, another instance, and another instance. Now, while that is a valid use case of instances, it is also quite dangerous because if you have different maintenance intervals between all of these different customers, you'll basically add them all up and your availability will suffer from that unless you strictly go with the same maintainability intervals for exactly these different instances. Now, a good way to separate out instances is to say my default instance, the first instance, is my purely administrative instance. There's no content on there. And it has all of the ability to install new applications, to manage the JVM level, server-side trigger, garbage collection, stuff like that. This is something that is limited to the default instance and is not available at all, no matter what permissions you give in any of the secondary instances. One of the, I would say, smart uses that I've seen that really caught me off guard. I was like, oh, there is a good use for instances outside of serving many different customers that must not know of each other. There we are in previous versions of Liferay. We had to dig through portal properties. There were portal properties that you could set in an instance specific way and portal properties that basically were global, but this is a lot easier now with system settings. Migrating system settings from one to the other, I would say, is also a lot easier. First of all, no restart. Second of all, export and import. Just go through the config files. There is no specific magic with the config files other than you just export them, import them in the other side. And you can even process them in between as they are just raw text. You might have seen that Liferay also has a clue about default configurations. So it says this has been configured explicitly, and you can reset the configuration to the original one. So that's something that you can easily do on the user interface, something that you couldn't do in previous versions before we adopted OSGI. So if you have made some of these changes, either through files or through the user interface, you can easily revert them back to the standard by just choosing the appropriate menu option, the appropriate command. Now there's a new short exercise for you to try your system administration foo, your powers to export a system configuration, create a new system setting, export the new setting, copy the configuration file, bring it on, and restore the default settings. This is all not rocket surgery, which means it should be very quick with that exercise. And then let me go through this review already. System settings allows for 2 scopes of configuration. System-wide properties apply to the current instance and all instances in the cluster, which is a long way of saying system-wide applies to system-wide, to everywhere, and current instance applies to the current instance. I would say we probably can improve on this fill-out box to just say, hey, system-wide applies there and instance-wide applies there. That's the takeaway there. Users can migrate or export-import system settings from one environment to another by exporting settings and importing. Yes! Perfect, you got it. Quick exercise, just be aware of the interface, export, restore default, import on the other, and then I'll see you all again. Ready, set.